You know those 400 or 800 metre races in the Olympics? For most of the distance, the runners keep a steady rhythm. They don't sprint from the start. But then, in the last 200, the last 100 metres, everything changes. Every athlete pushes to their absolute limit, muscles screaming, lungs burning, because whoever explodes hardest in those final metres wins the race. Right now, imagine the Alaska summit as that finish line. Picture two armies, Russia and Ukraine, already in full sprint, each pouring every last reserve of firepower and political leverage into the run. On the table are territory, influence, and the future of a war that has lasted years. On stage are presidents, envoys, and secret backroom offers. Off stage, tanks keep rolling, and frontline commanders keep fighting. That sharp contrast, public diplomacy in a remote Alaskan setting, while bullets and artillery decide the map, is the heart of what we're watching. This summit is unlike anything we've seen, rushed, unpredictable, and carrying echoes of the great wartime conferences of the past. There are no pre-written scripts, no pre-agreed joint statements. Think improvisation at the highest level of power. And improvisation is dangerous when battle lines are fresh and lives hang in the balance. In the next 10 minutes, we'll break down what's actually happening, the political chess moves, the military developments on the ground, and why a failed summit could mean a much darker chapter ahead, while a narrow, risky deal could end the fighting or redraw borders in ways no one expected. I'll explain why some players are pushing hard for a territorial swap, why others call that impossible, and how NATO and other powers fit into the picture. Before we dive into this breaking story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Let's start. They say wars are decided in the last sprint, and right now both sides feel like they're in the final 100 metres. On the ground, the fighting has intensified. In diplomacy, the tempo has been dialed up to match. The US and Russia have chosen Anchorage, Alaska, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson as the place for a one-on-one meeting on August 15th, and Washington is calling the encounter a listening exercise for President Trump. This is not a normal summit. It's rushed, tightly staged, and the world is watching to see whether it will end the race or simply change the lanes. What the battlefield looks like right now. Over the last few days, open source maps and independent monitors have recorded a sudden Russian push in Donetsk, notably around the coal mining area near Dobropillia, where lines have been pierced and Russian forces appear to have advanced roughly 10 kilometres in some sectors. That kind of movement is exactly the kind of leverage a negotiator wants to bring to a table. Facts on the ground that change the bargaining power of each side. But advances like these are bloody, expensive and unstable. They can create bargaining chips one day and partisan insurgencies the next. What each leader is playing for. Donald Trump has pitched himself as a deal maker who can end this war quickly. He's suggested that some territorial swaps might be on the table as part of a ceasefire. Vladimir Putin, for his part, has made clear Russian demands for control over parts of eastern Ukraine. Demands Kyiv rejects outright. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned repeatedly that there is no sign Putin wants to end the war. And Kyiv insists it will not accept deals that sacrifice Ukrainian sovereignty without its direct participation. That tension between a US president who says he can broker a fast fix and a Ukrainian leadership that fears being sidelined is the core political drama here. Why Russia might be pressing now. Timing matters. Military gains before a meeting can be used to strengthen negotiating positions. Analysts and monitoring groups suggested the recent thrusts may be designed to improve Moscow's bargaining posture ahead of talks. In plain terms, if Russia can present new frontline control or threaten vital logistics routes, it can argue that any settlement must recognise those facts. That's why you're seeing heavy armoured pushes, drone barrages and attempts to seize junctions and highways feeding the Donetsk pocket, the weapons and the new shape of combat. This phase of the war feels different, more robotic, more drone-heavy, more long-reach glide bombs and massed kamikaze drones that change how cities and supply lines are attacked. Journalists on the ground describe a high tempo of strikes and dozens, sometimes hundreds, of drones and loitering munitions being used each week. That kind of attrition both punishes civilian infrastructure and forces defenders to divert precious air defences and ammunition. The tactical picture you see in the news, therefore, has direct political consequences. It's not just territory that's being altered, it's the capacity to hold territory. The European and NATO response, red lines and distrust. European capitals and NATO allies are anxious. Their public message is simple. Any peace that rewards aggression would be unacceptable, and Ukraine must be part of any negotiations that determine its borders or security guarantees. There is real anger in Brussels and capitals across Europe about the idea that Ukraine might be cut out of talks that decide its future, that political friction will shape any outcome. Even if Trump and Putin reach a private understanding, it will face enormous resistance from allies. 3 realistic scenarios to watch. Limited deal under heavy pressure, a short, shaky ceasefire that freezes lines and accepts some territorial readjustments in return for a pause. This would likely be sold as peace by those who broker it, but would leave unresolved flashpoints and insurgent violence. No deal. More war. Talks collapse quickly, and Moscow uses the diplomatic failure as cover for an even more intense offensive to convert battlefield momentum into sovereign control. A staged tripartite process later, Trump teases a larger trilateral format, US, Russia, Ukraine, as a follow-up. This could stall fighting temporarily, but risks sidelining Ukraine in practice and leaving implementation to messy back channels. All 3 outcomes are plausible. Which one happens depends on how hardened frontline gains are, how much political cover Trump thinks he can provide, and whether Kiev and its European backers can shape terms before text is signed. What a failed summit would mean, and why success is fragile. If the meeting fails, the immediate risk is escalation. The losing side often tries to regain leverage on the ground. Military commanders will interpret diplomatic stalemate as license to press harder. Conversely, a successful summit that produces a ceasefire but ignores Ukrainian consent risks becoming only a temporary lull, a pause before the next round of conflict, because it will not solve the underlying political grievances or guarantee enforcement mechanisms. The devil is enforcement. Without clear, verifiable steps, any paper ceasefire can unravel quickly. What to watch for in the next 48 to 72 hours? Public statements. Look for concrete language about lines, security guarantees, and whether the word territory is used. Frontline activity. Any sudden increase in mechanised pushes or attempts to cut supply highways signals a bargaining campaign. Allied coordination. Watch EU and NATO communiques. If they publicly reject a proposal, it reduces its viability. Humanitarian signs, spikes in refugee flows or civilian area strikes are both a moral and political indicator of how fragile any deal would be. These are the visible signals that will tell you whether diplomacy is nudging the war toward peace or simply staging the next battle. Final practical point: why the location matters. Alaska is symbolic and practical, remote, highly secure, and historically resonant. Remember, Russia sold Alaska in 1867. Choosing Elmendorf sends a message. This is a controlled, tightly choreographed meeting where both sides want a specific environment to manage optics and security. But choreography can't substitute for substance. The real decisions will be made by generals and ministers in the days after any handshake, not in the handshake itself. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really at stake, do me a favour. Hit like, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss my next update. I post daily news breakdowns. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Alaska meeting will produce a real deal, or is it just theatre and pressure? Drop your take in the comments. Short or long, I read them all and I'll pin the most insightful reply. Also, I linked every source and the full reading list in the description, so check those if you want the original reporting and documents. If you found this useful, share the video with someone who needs the context. Thanks, and see you in the next one.